Thom Hartmann here with you. Well, it's really interesting. Last night, Louise and I were kind of pulling shifts. I fell asleep around 10, and she was, watching what was going on in the Senate on her. We were laying in bed, and she was watching it on her computer. And I kind of woke up around 12, 1, whatever time it was, sometime in the middle of the night, and she was like, they were voting on the motion to proceed to the vote, and or whatever it was called. And we listened to that for a little while. Then she fell asleep, and I woke up, around 3 or something, and it had been defeated, And so I woke her up and said, "Hey, I was defeated." And she was like, "Oh, thank you." I guess you can kind of tell that we don't have much of a life, when you spend your night following the Senate. But what I thought was most interesting was the three people who voted to stop this Republican debacle and the story behind it. And there's actually a bigger story behind that. Paul Ryan is in this story, and then the three people who voted no are in this story. But the big frame, the big piece for this whole thing is that Sunday is the, I think, 52nd anniversary of Lyndon Johnson signing Medicare into law. Maybe 62nd? No, it must be 52nd birthday, 52nd anniversary of it on Sunday. And this legislation would have killed Medicaid. And in fact, the way that Mitch McConnell was selling this thing to the Republican senators was with, as Mitch McConnell often does, a lie. And essentially what he was saying to them is, it doesn't matter what you guys vote on. It's going to go to the House Senate Conference Committee, and they're going to rewrite the whole thing anyway. And then you won't be held to account for it. You won't be blamed for it. And it's not going to be, as draconian as this bill is. And this bill was considerably watered down from how draconian the House bill was. And so, a few of the Republican senators were like, "Oh, okay, well, thanks for the reassurance." And then Paul Ryan last night said, the House is perfectly willing to take up the Senate bill, or words to that effect. In other words, when we may not even take this to reconciliation, to conference, or if we do, we'll just go with what you guys want and make it real easy, because we know that can pass the Senate. Now, at that point, it got super real, right? This is going to throw at least 15 million Americans off their health insurance, like right away. And down the road, it's going to be 20, 30 million Americans, and you're going to have bodies. We're going to see people dying as a result of what the Republicans were doing last night in the Senate. These little mind games on behalf of the libertarian billionaires who don't think that their tax dollars should go to pay for health care for takers rather than makers, right? I mean, that's really what this all boils down to. So Paul Ryan said that. So we knew right from the get-go there's 52 senators, 52 Republican senators out of 100. And two of them had already defected. Susan Collins of Maine had said, "No, I am not going to vote on this thing. This is bad for the people of Maine." And it is. I mean, Maine's a very rural state. It's got a lot of rural hospitals, and you do away with Medicaid, and a lot of those hospitals are going to go out of business. A lot of people in Maine would have been very, very badly hurt by that legislation. In fact, Susan Collins, had she voted yes, may have lost her seat, because the people of Maine have got this thing figured out. So, while it was, kind of noble of her to buck her own party, Susan Collins has done that before, and in fact, she really almost had no choice. I mean, she did a good thing, and I want to acknowledge her for it, but she didn't really put herself out on the limb. Lisa Murkowski, however, whole nother story. Lisa Murkowski, the Republican from Alaska, who her own party rejected at the institutional level in the last election, and they put up somebody else to run against her, and she ran a write-in campaign in Alaska. And, how do you spell Murkowski? Because you have to spell it perfectly right in order for that vote to count. And the people of Alaska wrote in her name, and she won. So she's pretty popular in Alaska. But Ryan Zinke called her and called the other senator from Alaska and said to both of them, "Nice state you got there. Nice oil and gas industry that I supervise on the federal lands. Be a shame if something happened to it. So Murkowski was facing an overt and explicit threat of revenge from the Interior Department and the administration. And, there's no doubt in my mind that they will probably try to punish her. So she was facing a serious threat of punishment. And, and the Republican Party is fairly strong in Alaska. So Lisa Murkowski actually took a hell of a chance saying, no, I'm going to do the right thing. Which brings us to John McCain. All over the media, I mean, I've seen 4 or 5 chyrons, the lower thirds on television saying, McCain cast decisive vote, blah, blah, blah. Well, yeah, he waited until he was the decisive vote. And McCain comes out and does the thumb down like the old Roman senators or the Roman people who would go to the amphitheater and watch the gladiators. And after they were all done, the gladiator that survived, if they would give him a thumbs up or a thumbs down, if it was thumbs down, they'd kill him, right? So John McCain, playing the role of a Roman senator, I guess, comes out and does a thumbs down. They record that as a no vote. The whole chamber goes, and McCain is treated like he's, the conquering hero. Well, conquering hero John McCain is not. And in fact, and I had printed out the story, but our printer has gotten totally flaky, and the story somehow never made its way to my desk. So my apologies to the people of Hawaii. I don't remember the name of your senator, but she flew back. She's a Democrat. She flew back for this vote, and she has stage 4 kidney cancer. She, stage 4, metastasized, high probability you're going to die. Kidney cancer. She flew back with this to vote against this health care bill. She gets no credit for that. McCain has brain cancer. He's got nothing to lose. He's not in all probability going to run for re-election. He may not even survive that long. And so it's not like this cost him a lot to do the right thing. If anything, frankly, with a lot of Americans, it made him a hero. But I think the real hero last night was Lisa Murkowski. And I think John McCain is getting way too much credit. Because the media has this whole narrative about, oh, he's such a maverick, he's so different, he's not like everybody else. Yeah, right. But the larger story, to get back to that, I keep, saying there's a bigger story here. The bigger story is that 52 years ago Sunday, we got both Medicare and Medicaid, and the American people discovered anew, as they did back in the 30s when we got Social Security, and over the years, many other programs brought to you by Democrats, from unemployment insurance to workman's compensation to, the 40-hour work week to, the list just goes on and on and on, that, brought to you by the Democrats, that people discovered when Social Security was passed that the government can do something right. The government can really be a force for good. This was after, 9 long years was Franklin Roosevelt's phrase. 9 years of living with a fatted calf, 3 years of depression, from 1920 to 1929, basically, from the election of Warren Harding until the great crash. What FDR showed us with Social Security is the government can work. It can work very efficiently. Nobody's ever missed a Social Security check. They've, since 1935, nobody. Every check has gone out. The system works just fine. The system is solvent. Needs a few tweaks around the edges, but it's doing just fine. Same with Medicare and Medicaid. And of course, the Republicans consider this socialism. Well, the billionaires consider it socialism. That we little people would ask for some of their money to help pay for a decent quality of life for all of us. They realize that a middle class is not a normal thing, that you have to create a middle class. Normal capitalist economics does not produce a middle class. What it produces is a very small, very wealthy class and a very large class of very poor people and a very tiny middle class, which is mostly doctors and lawyers and artisans who have, a really, really high level skill set. That's the middle class in classic economics. Charles Dickens wrote about it in all his novels. So if you want to have a real middle class that encompasses, all those people who otherwise would have made up the working poor. You have to have a transfer of wealth. You have to have minimum standards for business that say you cannot pay below this. Now, England didn't want that during the time of Charles Dickens. They actually had maximum wage laws that said you may not pay more than this, because they did not want a middle class to emerge, because middle classes are politically pesky. They tend to demand things like accountability and honesty in government. So, people have figured out, as the Democrats brought us the middle class in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and then the Republicans started systematically destroying the middle class in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, and 2010s, that there's a difference between these two parties, and they have different agendas. And that the Republican Party's agenda is all about the billionaire class and all about the transnational oligarchs and corporations, and that the Democratic Party's shtick, their thing, what they're all about, is working people. And people are more and more waking up to this. So, arguably, this is the real reason why the skinny deal is dead, is deep down inside, John McCain knew that the years and years that he has spent promoting lies and propping up his party and their BS agenda, pretending that they're here for the little guy who just wants to own his gun and just wants to be able to put nooses in front of the houses of black people and just wants to be sure that his school is segregated. The little guy, right? That all those years that the Republican Party had been defending that little guy, they had also been economically screwing the little guy. And John McCain knew this. This is no secret in Republican circles. They know it. They sit around. They laugh about it. But last night, he joined, the two women did the heavy lifting, right? Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski. They did the heavy lifting. John McCain comes in, stands on the platform for a few minutes, and basically is, whoa, what an amazing thing he did. Right. Anyhow, that's what happened last night. We'll be right back.